Now we're going to continue with the panel expansion models in electricity markets. Our guest will analyze the different challenges of the electric systems incorporating intermittent renewable energy, always using effective prices and adopting policies to mitigate climate change. We have Camilo Marulanda, economist of Universidad de los Andes with specialization in marketing and a master's degree in MBA from that same university. He was Ecopetrol's executive vice president, president of Ashmore Cafe Management Company, and CEO of Senate Hydrocarbon Logistics and Transporting Company. We also have Federico Echavarria, industrial engineer of Universidad de los Andes with an MBA from Harvard Business School. He has worked in AES during more than 15 years in different positions in Colombia, United States. He was general manager of Medielectrica, vice president of Banca de Inversión de Colfinsura, and also alternate member of the board of directors of Bancolombia. We also have Hakan Reisner-Legnes, senior consultant of Nord Pool Consulting. In 2007, he started working for a Swiss energy company. As of 2009, he has worked for the Nord Pool Group as representative of Nord Pool in the energy market project, which was launched in 2014. As of 2015, he has worked in external projects related to the energy market in Europe and welcoming different governments, authorities, regulators of energy companies of China, Japan, Canada, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Vietnam. We also have Jose Miguel Mendoza, who's leading the energy areas and company conflicts of DLA, Piper Martinez Beltran. As public utility superintendent, he led the efforts to renew the state supervision of the energy and water sectors as well as solving the energy crisis in the country. The moderator is Luis Barroso, director of PSR Energy Consulting and Analytics. He graduated in mathematics with a PhD in computer engineer. He has worked as a CEO of the Energy Planning Company of Brazil, EPE, partner and director of PSR. Also, he has been a researcher in the Universidad de Comillas in Madrid, professor of the Escuela de Regulación de Florencia, Italia. So I would like to give the floor to our moderator, Mr. Barroso. Good morning to each and every one of you. Thank you very much, Acolgen, for inviting me to participate in this panel. It's always great to be with our dear friends of Colombia, a country which was given many lessons in market design, transmission, generation, and indeed Acolgen plays an outstanding role in this. Today we have a very interesting panel because we have people here in this panel with a vast experience. We have Camilo, Federico, Hakan, Jose Miguel, and also the combination of Brazil and also Brazil, Norway, and Colombia are very similar countries when it comes to the energy-related topic. These are hydro countries. These are countries that have renewable resources for the energy expansion. These are countries leader in energy transmission. These are vulnerable countries, very vulnerable to climate change. Hence, we are going to have very interesting debates. I have a challenge, and that is that in 45 minutes, I'm going to have a dialogue with qualified people in very complex topics. I have divided the panel in 3 blocks. We have an initial block in which we will talk about the challenge of energy sufficiency in the long term. In block 2, we are going to see how to guarantee the optimum mix in all the different studies, and in block 3 where we are going to speak about the effect of climate change and how to incorporate that in the models, not only of sufficiency guarantee but also market models. Moreover, Hakan, voy a hablar con usted en inglés para que
So
nosotros
you on
podamos
board. We are very
asegurarnos
pleased to have you with
que
us. I was
sepa de qué
telling
vamos a
them
hablar. Es
that
un
we have
placer contar
Brazil,
con usted
Norway, and
aquí.
Colombia,
Les he dicho
three
que
hydro countries,
tenemos
three
a
lead countries
Noruega,
in energy
Brasil y
transition,
Colombia, tres
and three
países muy
countries with
importantes en la
somewhat
transición
different
energética,
challenges. But
países que
this is going to
enfrentan
be a
muchos
great conversation.
desafíos. Pero
So,
este va a ser un diálogo
volviendo al
sumamente
español, allí
interesante.
pobre
Well,
portuñol, de
going
hecho,
back
y
to
empezando el bloque
Spanish,
uno, yo
we are going
quería
to
invitar
start with
aquí
block
mis
one.
amigos
I would
Federico,
like to
Camilo.
invite Federico, Camilo, and Jose Miguel just to speak about the search of self-sufficiency in the capacity generation of power and talking about reliability charge, which has a very important leadership in Acolgen. The pioneer discussions started in Acolgen in 1999 with Professor Ignacio Perez, and reliability charge is an international reference which has been adopted in many other countries, and it has been widely studied by other countries. Federico, thanking you for the participation in this panel. I want to ask the same question to you and to Camilo. Which is your outlook on the reliability charge mechanism, and which are the improvement opportunities? That question is for you and for Camilo. Thank you.
Mil gracias, Luis.
Thank you, Luis, for leading this panel. And as you have mentioned, this is a very interesting topic, and Colombia has become an international benchmark. Thank you to Acolgen for inviting us and for organizing this 13th Energy Congress. It is an honor to share with Hakan, Camilo, and Jose Miguel this panel. We need to be pretty straightforward. Reliability charge has worked in the country, and the power sector has really complied with its specifications. We have been capable of creating the energy sufficiency needed by the country. And we have had two critical events that have evidenced this since the implementation of the new reliability charge in the year 2000 from 2010, and that was 2009 and 2010. And then another event that has been considered a very critical event with the El Niño phenomenon, which was 2014 to 2016. So I believe that the important message here is that we have indeed had critical events, and the reliability charge has met its expectations. Reliability charge has provided the expansion we needed. So it's not only that it has met its goals, but it has brought in the expansion needed hand in hand with an investment that is measuring billions and billions of dollars. I think that is the most important message now. It has no sense to move to another energy sufficiency system because we have one that has worked well. It is necessary for the reliability charge to adjust to current circumstances. Mainly, reliability charge should adjust to the energy transition in which unconventional renewable energy start playing a very important role. And hence, the most important adjustment that we would like to suggest is to properly recognize the contribution of these energies to the country's reliability. And in order to understand that role, it is important to make a difference between capacity charge and reliability charge. Throughout the world, they speak about the capacity charge, and in markets such as California, Chile, they have capacity issues, which is as simple as the availability markets have of satisfying during peak hours where there is a higher demand. For example, in California during the drier day where all the air conditioners are on, and they have problems satisfying demand. In the case of Colombia, we do not have capacity problem. In the case of Colombia, we have an energy-related problem, and that's why we have established the reliability charge, in which we must solve quite a challenge. In a critical event that usually takes from 6 to 10 months, we are able to satisfy the energy required by the country, and usually that event coincides with El Niño phenomenon. I believe it is important to make that difference in order to understand the role of renewable energy, unconventional renewable energy. And given its characteristic, the expectation is that during the next critical phenomenon that we'll face, the technologies that behave better are unconventional renewable energy. And it's very simple. Unconventional renewable energy have a positive relation with ONI, which is the index of the Pacific El Niño. It is worth mentioning that it is not sufficient to have a guaranteed energy sufficiency. Actually, historically, the reliability charge was established for that in order to have energy efficiency. So sometimes I stop and think, why do we face so many problems when we are facing those events? And I'm not talking about sufficiency problems, because the sufficiency is there. We have media problems. There is uncertainty among the people in the sector and among the general public. So I'm always asking, what are we missing? Why in 2020, when we had the third driest year, we didn't have that media issues of a rationing in coming years that were classified as El Niño, and they were less critical. And we also have that topic related to uncertainty. I remember that in 2014 to 2016, around February or March, when we were in the midst of the worst moment, there was some uncertainty as to the end of El Niño phenomenon. Do you think it's going to end in April, or is it going to take longer? So that's the moment when we have to show society that we are prepared to El Niño phenomenon. That means that when we have an important component of non-renewable conventional energies such as sun and wind, that uncertainty is going to come to an end, because it's not only negative news regarding lack of water, but we have the good news that unconventional renewable energy are going to be incorporated to solve these problems in the country. So to wrap up, reliability charge works very well. It has met its expectations, but we need to adjust it in order to provide more expansion of unconventional renewable energy that will enable us to face the sufficiency topic, but also the expectations of the market and end customers regarding our reliability charge that will allow us to have a broader matrix. Thank you very much, Federico. Camilo, I would like to listen to your answer regarding reliability charge. Camilo, you have to unmute your microphone, please. Thank you.
Perfecto.
Good morning to each and every one of you. Special greetings to Luis and to the other members of the panel. And also special thanks to Acolgen for this opportunity to participate in this panel. My comments agree with those of Federico. I think that the reliability charge has been a very positive system for the country, which has enabled not only the expansion of the country's electricity, but it has also guaranteed the supply in very critical moments. As mentioned by Federico, 2020, with very low rainfall. And in the past, we've had many events like that. And I think about the reliability charge as a very expensive good, but it is even more expensive when you do not have it. So that is the balance that we must have on the cost and benefit when you have a system that guarantees the country's supply, even in critical and extreme moments. My opinion is that the opportunities of the reliability charge system tend to improve enforcement, not only as to the follow-up, the hydro and thermal plants that participate today in this system could comply with their commitments, and for those guarantees to become effective if they do not comply with them. But I think it is important for the country to define the expansion mechanism for the system. Today, we have a reliability charge system, but we also have one of long-term auctions for unconventionals that I have always understood this as a temporary topic in order to encourage the growth of wind and solar plants. But I think that we have to harmonize the two signals of growth, and that harmonization should be promoted by the market's needs. That's one of the items I would like to convey. The second topic is that we have to think better about complementing the different sources and to value them as such. I think that for the country, it is much better to have a balance among generation sources, hydro, thermal, wind and solar sources, and we need to value that complementarity, and we have to pay for that. And I think that the stability in the rules of the game is of paramount importance, because these are 20, 30, 50-year investments, and we as an investors cannot think about when regulations are going to change. I think that the system has been working well. Things have changed indeed, and there are improvement opportunities. But we have to see the positive side of what we have experienced and what we have seen as a world reference, and to build on the positive aspects for the peace of mind of the sector and of Colombians. Excellent intervention, Camilo. I really liked your comments. Now, I'm going to ask José Miguel about the importance of enforcement to comply with the rules and just to make sure they deliver what has been contracted. José Miguel, I want to speak about that, about the challenge of the reliability charge, because in practice, the idea is to pay and to receive what they've paid for. This has to do with incentives in order for generators to produce and deliver what has been bought. How do you see this? What's your outlook? Please unmute your microphone.
No le escuchamos.
We can't hear you.
Okay, si no le escuchamos, lo que puede hacer es...
Well, given that we can't hear you, well, we fix your sound problem.
¿Estás, José Miguel?
José Miguel, are you there?
Perfecto. Adelante.
Okay. No, the microphone was open, but I don't know what happened. Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank Acolgen for this invitation. It's quite an honor for me to share this panel with important members of this sector. As to enforcement, I think that we do have structural problems in the energy design, and I'm going to speak about it at the end. The idea is that this system that was built based on reliability charge, how can it comply with its main objective, and that is to guarantee energy in the most critical moments. For example, to guarantee that if there is a financial crisis affecting the energy sector, or that if we have a El Niño phenomenon, we need to have a constant energy supply. When it comes to these systems, the default of this. It puts the energy system at stake in Colombia, and this has happened a couple of times in the past, where we've been very close to a blackout. The problems we see in this sector are similar to those of the financial system, like moral hazards, systemic risk problems. I think that should be the approach. How can we make sure that this system works properly? How can we make sure that those receiving the resources of the reliability charge are in the adequate conditions to supply the country with energy? There are many techniques that can be useful for that. Colombia has carried out many experiments with many of them. First and foremost, enforcement based on administrative actions is not enough. Sanctions do not solve the problem. During the past 8 years, the Colombian supervisor in the area of energy has imposed the higher sanctions in the history of the country because the rules have been infringed, and that has not given us more reliability. Sanctions are late when we've already gone through the defaults as to firm energy, and the damage has been caused. Actually, the sanctions will exacerbate the problem. If you impose a sanction to someone that is having solvency problems, I mean, they could do worse. The sanctions indeed solve moral hazard problems, but they are not enough to comply with the main objective of reliability. That's why some alternatives have been proposed, and they are being analyzed now. Some additional guarantees for generating agents, some explicit penalties, as for example, I mean, to affect those that have been in default, to create a fund in order to make sure that all the generators can comply with firm energy, or even the deepening of the energy byproducts market. I do not like some the derivatives. Some of this I don't like because they could increase the cost and they could disencourage those that want to participate. So there is an idea around the different state institutions, and I really do not like that idea, and it's to involve control bodies to consider that reliability charge resources are public and deserve the attention of control authorities. For example, to include the prosecutors or the general attorney's office. I think that's quite a mistake that will put an end to the reliability charge, because in practice we will be converting all our generators in public entities subject to a very aggressive control that it's not compared to the situation of the sector. The idea I like the most, which is somewhat different, and Colombia has some background on how this works. In 2017, we put this in place, and it was the public utility superintendent. It is related to the stress test that was put in place by the Secretary of the Treasury of President Obama. It was designed during the crisis of 2008. It is a prudential supervision system. The companies participating in reliability charge system must comply with some financial and operational assumptions. They have to comply with certain ratios, with certain liquidity and solvency that are quite easy for those companies participating in the sector. And also the financial data of those companies receiving the reliability charge are measured against some event simulated here. So the computer simulates what's happening to the finance of a company during the El Niño phenomenon, or during a crisis in the financial system, or what happens if there is a cyber attack, ransomware that is in vogue lately, or problems with the fuel supply. So if the generator doesn't pass that stress test, they have to adopt the necessary measures. This is something that could be very effective for the system, because it guarantees the system's reliability, because it is an ex-ante protection mechanism. It anticipates the problems. And to wrap up, Luis, I think it is very important to count on a system that guarantees that the reliability charge works properly, as has been the case throughout the history of Colombia. Any failure in the system erodes not only the reliability of the system, but the trust of the citizens. And that is what gives rise to all these political and media issues that hinder the introduction of a just. And when there are political debates, it is going to be more difficult to introduce smart, gradual measures into the system, and we end up in debates that do not take us anywhere.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Excellent comments. Now, this is the time to hear about the European experience. This is a very hot debate at this point in Europe, how to guarantee long-term sufficiency. Different countries have different approaches, and it's not an easy topic to guide, but Ireland, Italy have looked at very similar models as the Colombian model. So,
Your time has come. I'm going to shift the word to you. The discussion on the neutrality of the long-term electricity, it's rather hot as well, with all the capacity remuneration mechanisms being discussed everywhere, but not that much being implemented. So, with the penetration of renewables, how do you see the discussion of the long-term electricity supply moving forward here?
Well, thank you, Luis, and it's a pleasure to see you again, even though this time it is not in sunny Oslo. I even have to put sunscreen on today. Yes, I'd be happy to share some thoughts on the CRM markets and how the implementation or the penetration of a lot of more renewable energy and the impact it has had in Europe. I can use a live example actually in the chat with the panel. I shared with you a YouTube clip, which basically shows you the entire European continent from Spain and Portugal and Greece in the south up until Norway and Finland in the north. And you can actually see the energy mix day on day throughout the year. This was, we had a presentation on the stress test in Texas that they had on the 15th of February this year. Well, the year of 2020 was the stress test in Europe on how we're going to handle a penetration of 40% renewable energy in the energy mix. In Norway, it's 100% renewable. On continental Europe, it tends to be lower, but 40% is higher than thermal power in Europe for the first time ever. So this was really our real-time stress test. It was partly due to the COVID because demand went down. So prices of electricity went down and it squeezed out a lot of the thermal power. So basically, we were running the entire European energy market, the day-ahead market, but everything related to it as well, with more than 40% renewable energy. And it's not such a challenge from the CRM point of view, the security supply from thermal power plants, as the challenge with the fluctuation of wind and solar. Like for instance, last week we had a solar eclipse, and now we have many gigawatts of installed capacity of solar. We're not as sunny as Colombia or Ecuador or so, or Brazil, but we still rely quite a lot on that kind of source of fluctuating renewable energy sources. And truth be told, we had the cheapest energy in Europe history, and if we only look at energy costs in itself. And we had the greenest and the lowest CO2 emissions since the Industrial Revolution started, more than a century ago. So for our side, it looks like we are up to handling it. Of course, we do have challenges, but it's more not on a pan-European perspective, but more on a local one. A country in particular is Belgium. They have problems because it's a small country. It has some interconnectors to United Kingdom, which is now no longer part of the European Union and no longer part of the pan-European energy markets, even though we do handle cross-border trades for them. But a country like Belgium, as an example, they're closing down their nuclear power plants, and they have a very ambitious renewable energy goal. It is in line with the international energy agencies on the path to 2030 and 2050 to net zero. So they're reducing not just nuclear power, but also a lot more of a problem with nuclear power, but also the coal power and gas power is going out. In this case, particularly Belgium and also in Germany, there is talk of a CRM system where you can have some capacities in case of something unfortunate would happen, like extreme colds, or if there's a solar eclipse that lasts for surprisingly long, or if there is a lack of wind, for instance. But truth be told, the best security of supply measurements we've done is to have more interconnectors. And in reference to the previous presentation on Acolgen in Texas, Texas is not interconnected to Louisiana or to their neighboring states or to Mexico in the south, while we have our best security of supply and reserve markets basically in the day ahead and intraday market coming from neighboring countries. So the short question is that there are local and national CRM mechanisms set in place, mostly driven because you have a very strong coal lobby. You have, like in the case of Poland, you have 250,000 people working directly in the coal industry. If you're a politician in a democracy and you want to get re-elected, you're not going to say we're going to close tomorrow and you're all out of work and good luck. Here's a book on how to set up a windmill. You can't do that. It's not that easy to turn around. So there needs to be like a transit in this period. So some energy companies are paid to keep some of their thermal power on a standby, basically. But this is basically this is literally the end of the coal area in Europe, where the coal power plants will be closed down. They will vanish out of the energy mix, and by the illustration of the year 2020, we have proven that in an extreme situation, we have extreme weather events during the 2020 as well, then we can handle this. But we handle this because we are mutually reliant on each other. So CRM systems, not so important on a security supply point of view, but really the most important part is better integration with the day-ahead market and intraday markets. And as you know, the day-ahead market it goes from Greece in the south to Norway in the north, and the intraday market has also expanded, almost covering the same areas. Could mention as a side note that that CRM systems are national by nature, but in the Nordic countries, we actually share reserves among the TSOs for that kind of purposes. But all capacity is given on the interconnectors between countries and bidding areas is given to the day-ahead and intraday market primarily. That is the main rule. That is a very long answer to a very specific and very good question.
It was absolutely excellent, Hakon. You gave just us a lecture on how Europe has been doing this. And I will switch back to Spanish now, because we moved to the other topic. Y vamos ahora cerrando el primer tema, que era el tema.
Closing another topic, which was sufficiency, we will come into the topic of the mix. Hakon's comments were very interesting in that the mechanisms that look at the longer term are interesting, but what's really worth it is the interconnections and the exchanges and the prices. Letting the markets work, letting the market provide the security of the mechanisms that are being sought. So I thought that was very interesting. I wanted to go back to our friends, Federico and Camilo, to discuss the mix. And Federico and Camilo, I have a question for both of you. In your view, the current structure of the Colombian market will be enough to guarantee that the expansion of generation will occur having the appropriate mix or the right set of technologies so as to manage all the services that the system needs? Now, Camilo, I wanted to take this opportunity and ask you precisely if you believe that the Colombian market is correctly remunerating all the services that generators can provide to guarantee the right mix, or will it be necessary to have some additional streamlining? Well, thank you, Luis. I think that in Colombia, we start from a very beneficial position in that Colombia is a country that is very rich in all type of energy technologies, both conventional and unconventional. So I think that it is not the case of other countries that have some restrictions on one or on another. Actually, here, due to our own circumstances, we can afford to meet efficiently the two components that I mentioned before: reliability and efficiency. Reliability understood as sufficient supply in order to be able to meet the client's needs given a critical event. And efficiency understood from the point of view that clients aspire to receive competitive power in order to meet their needs in terms of electricity supply. So at the end of the day, the market enables each agent to choose their own technology. And here Camilo's comment is very important. Assuming that the auctions prices in the long term for unconventional renewables is a temporary matter. We had always looked at that as the spark of this country to create a culture of long-term contracts. We already had the first auction in 2019, and there's a plan for having another one in 2021, but that has to be enough for the market to continue working on the basis of bilateral relationships between buyers and sellers. I think that we have expansion neutral mechanisms that make it possible for us to have the most reliable and most efficient technologies prevailing. But we have a big concern regarding your second question, and it is that, and you're asking whether we have peace of mind in that all services are being appropriately remunerated. And I would go back to HARCOM, which is the topic of fluctuation in the unconventional renewable energies. There's no secret in saying that no technology can meet all the needs of the market. And the fluctuation and intermittence, well, we all know that the unconventional energies are not able to meet that. Hence the importance of conventional energies. And Colombia has a special advantage here, given its water capability, its hydro capability, because of the storage capacity and its ability to quickly react due to its flexibility in order to supplement that fluctuation coming from the unconventional renewable energies. And in Colombia, I know that the Regulatory Commission is working on this and developing this, but it is fundamental for the country to develop the right regulations so that these fluctuating energies can be integrated into our system, and specifically, as HARCOM said, in the next day market or the binding market or intraday markets, so that at the end of the day, we can have a system that will allow for that mix that the country needs, but making sure that all the services will be appropriately remunerated. And I want to send the message also that when I say appropriately, it's a balance between the suppliers of conventional energies and those that need the unconventionals. That regulation will not lean too much towards either side. That balance will be crucial to ensure that that mix and that the provision of the services will be provided appropriately. Thank you very much. Camilo? I think you're muted.
Perfecto. Yo tengo una visión
My view
un poquito libertaria sobre este tema de servicios complementarios. Hoy en día en el país
it's a little bit free regarding the remuneration. In the country, only the HEC is being remunerated from a tax point of view. And the fixing of the price is associated to the stock exchange price and to the cost of the pass-through. And I think that the signal sent by the regulator regarding an independent price-making mechanism for these complementary service is the way to go. I think that this has to be set aside from the stock exchange price and the pass-through cost. I think so. But I think that there are many other supplementary services that we provide, like the Black Start or the reactive power, which are not being remunerated today, perhaps because their need was not so notorious. But as we walk towards multimodal markets, which is yet another regulatory signal that we're receiving, and as Federico mentioned, to the extent that the unconventionals will grow, when that happens, we will need more complementary services in order to maintain stability throughout the grid. So we call upon the regulator to become more proactive around generating a signal and remuneration mechanisms for these services in order to be able to sustain and maintain sustainability throughout the system. I think that the growth of the unconventional renewable sources is a reality, and we are very lucky in our country because we have world-class resources in this sense. But this also has to come hand in hand with a regulatory framework that will make it possible to implement and add and integrate these new sources to a system that may be sustainable through time. Excellent, Camilo. Very good comments. I've heard that, or I just wanted to add that in my country, Brazil, the discussion is exactly the same. We're basically discussing how to remunerate the services that are provided to guarantee that the cost of the technologies will be right and correctly calculated so that all technologies may be compared on the same basis to level the rules of the game so that all technologies can compete, each one contributing its own benefits while also paying for the costs that it contributes to the system. Very good discussion. And I wanted to move for our last discussion panel, which is the block having to do with climate risk. Well, as we know, Brazil, Colombia, and Norway are very vulnerable to climate change because our renewable energy is an energy that is exposed to the adverse effects of climate change and the changes in the flow of our rivers, etc. In Brazil, we just finished a wet period of flows that has been the worst in history. We have empty dams and we have yellow flags saying that the supply security may be threatened for the second semester. Texas also shows us many lessons, and California with the forest fires and with what happened last year. And in fact, situations are changing. That's the truth. And I think that as a country, as companies, and as people in the market, we just have to adapt ourselves. At this point, I would like to start this discussion by bringing Jose Miguel to the playfield again. Jose Miguel, climate change risk is an increasing concern already, and this will be substantially affecting the way contracts are designed and defined, and above all, as we all know, climate change risk is managed on a contractual basis. Could you tell us a little bit, how is it that, in your own point of view, you would see this debate moving forward, connecting this with the enforcement discussion that we just had a few minutes ago?
Gracias, Luisa. ¿Y me oyes?
Thank you, Luis. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Good. My view here is very clear about what I believe should be the next step to take in Colombia towards facing climate risk. I would like to go back to Ricardo Hausmann's article published a couple of weeks ago. It's green development an oxymoron? The contribution of developing countries.
And Hausmann starts with a provoking idea. And he says the main causes of global warming are in industrialized countries. Do you think it's fair that developing countries are now forced to participate in this green movement, while that could increase the energy price and could stop its economic development? Hausmann says that this is a false dilemma, explaining This based on Bill Gates' theories that the decarbonization process is going to transform all the chains, and that the most interesting growth opportunities are going to be in the green economy. And the article concludes with an idea, and that's the relevant one here, that developing countries such as Colombia should think strategically in order to understand what's their position in this new economy. The important point of the article is, the great opportunities are in this new production chain, and each country must identify its institutional strength when it comes to natural resources. In Colombia, the long-term energy auctions have been very important in order to encourage renewable projects in the country and this way fight climate change. Colombia has the sixth cleanest energy mix in the planet. Perhaps we must focus national efforts in other areas, or not to focus only in expanding the mix with renewable energy. I think that the strength of Colombia in these new production chains come with a carbon emissions market. If you just start playing with the numbers, with the diversification of the energy mix with unconventional sources, we can reduce 7 million tons of CO2 equivalent. With a transition to the energy matrix, you can say 4 million tons. And with many things, you have reductions of 2 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Colombia is the fourth country in Latin America with the largest numbers of clean development mechanisms. So we have the conditions in order for the carbon emissions market to work properly. We even have the legal structure for that to happen. This is a law issued in 2018, which established an emissions trade market. With that system, we are going to be able to have an effective allocation of maximum points and the possibility of trading this in the secondary or in the international market. What's the problem here? Something that we have seen in other countries and that most likely will need to face also in Colombia, because that's a Latin American vice, mainly a Colombian vice, and that's over-regulation. We end up destroying the new markets, the most innovative ideas with excessive bureaucracy, with unnecessary processes. It's like a regulatory arthritis that result in things not working well. That's the worst thing that could happen to the new carbon emissions market. It is important for us not to continue the example of some countries which have introduced emissions trade mechanisms under the Kyoto Protocol that have been very complex and made it impossible for things to work properly. The systems to be promoted in Colombia from here on need to be compatible with international standards. We will need to have a regional and international integration. We'll need to have a coordination with the systems that are promoted by the private system like Eco Registry. And we need for Colombia to be compatible with that international emissions market in which we do have an important advantage. That's great. That's a very interesting discussion. For example, what we are observing in Brazil regarding the crisis that we have is that we have ideological sequences that are closer to those that you have in the historical flows. So that could change the planning criterion in my country, and that has a lot to do with, we have in Brazil something that is called INFIC, and that could change the way the expansion is going to take place, depending on how the climate uncertainty and the climate risk is included in the planning long-term criterion. That is the discussion of these electricity markets. Now I would like to give the floor to Håkan and to see how are they seeing this. Europe is advanced when it comes to carbon market. That is quite a reference. And companies need to have leadership in the actions for a low carbon economy.
Shifting the ball back to you. So you guys in Europe have been leading the carbon markets. The ETS has been a long-term effort, and also the EU companies are on the leadership, I would say, on the road towards the net zero economy. So tell us how climate business risk has been handled, if you can, under the market standpoint and market slash regulations, but also how companies have been factoring this in their business decisions. Thank you.
Well, yeah, well, that's an easy one to cover. Now, excellent. That's an excellent question, and thank you for the opportunity to explain this, because there are in Europe, and Norway being a part of Europe in this case, but in the European Union, since 2005 there has been a carbon market, and also in regards to Jose's comment that there should be a market that is synchronized with other markets, so that we're kind of like talking about the same apples and apples, so that we're comparing the same thing. I'll say one thing that will drive this is two things that will definitely change how Europe is handling the climate crisis, and which is going to be a radical change and is being implemented as we speak. And that is EU taxonomy. Are you familiar with the EU taxonomy? It is a radical shift, which basically means that, basically, the Americans say that money talks and bullshit walks. And in this case, not bullshit as in biofuel, but really, talking about a lot of hot air will blow away, but this makes it into law. We've seen it in Holland, where basically Shell has been forced to reduce their emissions by 45%. And this is because basically they're being implemented by law. But in this case, EU taxonomy are 6 principles on how we're going to preserve the planet while actually making sure that we're not sawing off or cutting the branch off under the tree that we're sitting in, basically, for future generations. And they are also giving a handful, or like a forest of opportunities on how this is going to grow. And basically, if you're not complying with the EU's taxonomies, which basically is biodiversity or renewable energy and such, if you're supporting one or all of these, you can basically get access to cheap money. If you're not complying with this, borrowing money will cost you more, which basically means that in the future, if you're going to go to the bank and say, I want to build another coal power plant, well, yes, certainly you can. There's no law that will prevent you from that in many countries. But you go to the bank and you realize that it's much cheaper to borrow money for a carbon capture storage solution for your current coal power plant, where you basically can produce electricity, but you can also contain the CO2 and pump it down into a reservoir somewhere else. So this will be a game changer. And in order to not give the European Union or the Europe a disadvantage in competing with China or India, which definitely are still building coal power plants, they are enforcing something called a carbon adjustment tax, basically, which means that if you're exporting products to Europe, you will have to document that whatever you were producing was produced in a sustainable way, that there was a carbon tax on top of that. This brings us back to Jose. It's a comment on having markets that will be compatible in some way. So if you can document that in Colombia, we have a carbon market and we are reducing our emissions, and these are the taxes I've already paid, you're not going to be subject to that kind of taxes. So that means that you could import or export your goods to the European Union. If you cannot document this, you will no longer be able to import or export to the European Union, or you will be able to, but you will be having an additional tax that goes back to the European Union, basically. So this is a massive game changer. And Europe being the biggest common market in the world, it is a huge market and it is a trend center. Brussels is a small city, but the bureaucrats there are setting some standards for how this is being done. I kind of trailed off here a little bit, but this really has a massive impact because we see that the old traditional coal companies are lacking money for investments in new kind of projects. And that is a huge game changer for their parts. We saw one last coal power plant being set up last year, and we think this was the last one ever being built in Europe, and that they will all be closed down within the next decade. And I mean, there are some targets for when they will actually close off the last ones. But I can give you an example in the L certificate market in between Norway and Sweden, where we basically reach our goal for more renewable capacity in Scandinavia 9 years ahead of schedule. The target was 2030, and we reach it this year. So we're going to terminate the market, and it basically incentivized people to build more wind power and renewable energy sources. And they're closing down coal power across Sweden, and in fact, nuclear power is going off the grid as well because they're no longer profitable. So anybody who's now in a company that is owning assets that are heavily invested in coal power or gas power, even that is supposed to be better, they still have CO2 emissions. In order to reach zero emissions, you cannot longer rely on gas. For Norway's point of view, which is similar to Colombia and Brazil, is that we have a problem as well because our generation of electricity is 100% pure, but we are also a massive exporter of natural gas and oil to continental Europe, but also to a global market. So what are we going to do? We have a bit of a double standard there. I do not agree with our current government, even though they make a lot of sense. But there is a change in Europe that they will no longer buy products from Norway unless they can document that it actually came from renewable energy sources. So I think the regulation, it was mentioned several times now that regulation needs to it needs to be predictable, and it doesn't have to be too complicated. This is basically the foundation for the new regulations on the finance market. And you need money in order to operate all of this. And on the demand side, individuals and companies will no longer buy products that comes from sources that are not sustainable. So we're seeing a radical shift where we're not longer talking about a political spectre where you have blue and red and all that, but we're talking about green parties and grey parties, and there is a radical change, and especially with the new generation, the Get Up better generation coming up, and they're basically calling us on any bullshit that we serve in their direction, and this is having a massive impact on our energy mix and then the choice of profession that people chooses, and especially for Norway, that has been a radical change. And I think that this will also be across Europe. I mean, there definitely a radical change, and 2021 was the year where everything was changed, I think.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have just run out of time, and then I'll have to move to the end. So I just want to thank you for your presence. It was a privilege to have you here. We learned quite a lot from your insights. Y moviéndome al español ahora.
Nosotros, and now going back to Spanish, Camilo, Federico, Jose Miguel, we have to adjourn this dialogue. We still have many pending topics, but anyhow, thank you very much for your participation. It's been an honor to be here with people with vast knowledge and experience, great comments. I would like to thank Natalia, Raul, Susana, and all the Acolgen team that have done an excellent job, not only in Colombia, but the ideas that other countries can really take advantage of the good things that you're doing in that dear country, which is Colombia. Thank you very much. I hope you have found this very interesting, and it has been a great pleasure. I wish you much luck in this conference.